Hey, hello. Welcome to episode number 107 of the People We Love podcast. I am Adam Choit. What's up? If you are new here, what I do is interview people from all walks of life, most often comedians and other artists about their lives and careers. The conversation is casual, but I also ask everyone to highlight the people they love, who they admire, who influenced them, inspired them, and supported them. For more, check out peoplewelovepodcast.com. That's peoplewelovepodcast.com. And the Instagram handle is at peoplewelovepodcast. And you can find me on Instagram and Twitter as well if you want to follow me at Adam Choit. And please remember to tap subscribe or follow on whatever platform you listen to podcasts on. And of course, positive 5-star reviews on iTunes are greatly appreciated as well. So, today's guest is current computer coder and former vice chair of the Libertarian Party, Alex Merced. And he has done so much more beyond that, and we get into all of it. Growing up, Alex was inspired by his hardworking single mom, and that is clear by the person he's become today. And we talk music, economics, Ron Paul, and more. But Alex is a man who truly values patience, kindness, empathy, and forgiveness, and there's no doubt that that comes from mom. But let's just get started. Here's Alex Merced. So it's good to see you today, Alex Merced. Thank you for joining me on the Zoom. I appreciate it.
Thank you for having me on the show. I'm so excited to be here.
Oh, for sure. How are you holding up during this super fun, whatever year it is now? That's what I'm going to say.
Yeah, no, I was very, very fortunate that what happened is that mid 2019, I decided to change careers from doing a lot of training in the financial industry to becoming a software developer. So in late 2019, I went into a coding boot camp. And so basically I graduated early January 2020. And then my first job I got was remote. So basically I was working from home throughout all 2020. So I basically just stayed home and basically wrote everything out.
Would you have been doing that anyway, even if you didn't do this transition into coding? Or, I mean, obviously it's very heavy in computer work, so you can probably do it remotely.
Yeah.
But was that the plan in a sense even?
No, I just worked out. Because I mean, usually you don't expect at the entry level to get a remote job. And this is before anything with COVID was even on anyone's radar, really. So I just kind of was fortunate that. And then also the company where the company that trained me, General Assembly, also decided to hire me. Just because I started creating content to teach a lot of my fellow cohort, a lot of the other students who were in my cohort, and they noticed that, and they're like, "Oh, this guy knows how to teach, so let's hire him." So they brought me on, and I've been now teaching. Just started my 8th cohort today, teaching with them, and then I also work as a developer full time on the side. So basically, I'm working 80 hours a week as a remote developer, and I can't complain.
Is that what everybody should be doing? Is coding? I feel like it's almost like a meme or you gotta. That's where all the jobs are. That's what everything is. It's all graphic design, coding, or service industry.
I think
where we're all headed.
It's a worthwhile skill to have because generally, even if you don't become a professional software developer, almost all the way you think, the way really what coding is, it's not even so much the code. You can learn syntax, it's like learning a language. But what really matters is the way you think, the way you break down problems, and you think about solutions and experiment. And that level of thinking, I think, kind of benefits anybody in any field. And also, even if you don't become a programmer, knowing coding can oftentimes let you create other opportunities, whether you're working as an administrative assistant. And hey, knowing a little coding helps you really put together really cool automations to help organize workflows, or you're a musician and you create some cool tools to track tour dates or actually virtual instruments. You can really use that skill set in pretty much any space. And the way the benefit of learning how to think logically, I think is super beneficial. And I think in today's world, that a high level of logic is no longer becoming less of a nice thing to have, more becoming a necessary thing to have, because a lot of the easy problems have been solved and there's tools to solve those easy problems. So now basically humanity's collective force is needed to solve more complicated problems, which needs us all to be more on the aggregate, more logical thinkers to solve those harder and harder problems.
Yeah, I don't know if humanity is headed in that direction, but maybe enough small, passionate, people can have an influence who are who do think logically or aspire to think logically. What separates someone who's successful at coding versus someone who's not? One is my last coding question before, and then we'll get into it. Like, what separates someone who's good at, and why can't someone? Why does someone not fail in that pursuit? Is it just that it's like a language, like you're saying, and it takes so long, and people don't have that? They're not willing to put in the time, and they don't have the patience. Like anything, is that what it is?
I think patience is probably like the thing that like basically you have to be okay struggling because
Right.
literally coding is just a lot of struggling. Literally everything I do, I might spend like an hour of coding and 3 hours of doing research because you constantly hit walls because you're oftentimes not solving problems that have been solved before. You're solving problems that haven't been solved before because you're building something that hasn't been built before. So you have to constantly like you have to one, be very patient. Two, you have to like learning and enjoy finding new information because you're going to constantly have to learn. Like the amount of new stuff in coding is coming up faster than anyone could learn it. So it's like
That's so healthy, though. That seems like such a healthy thing for the human mind.
I love it. Like I absolutely adore learning. It's like so like
I can tell.
Thanks. Yeah,
I mean, so.
Oh yeah. I mean, that's kind of like how I got started in all the things that I got started, just out of a passion for knowledge. But like if you like to learn and patience, and these are things that can be developed. I've seen people who did not have these things going into it develop these things. You can become a coder. Like at the end of the day, like anything you do, long as you're passionate about it or you try to find passion in it, you'll be successful. Like that's oftentimes the difference between someone who succeeds and someone who doesn't. It's just passion. Because when you go into an interview, and if you're a company who's interviewing 100 people, like who's going to stand out? The person who lacked passion or the person who has a lot of passion, went in that room, was excited about talking, really seemed excited about the things that they're doing or could be doing. One of those two are going to stand out. And oftentimes, if you just find a way to be passionate about anything you're doing, like even when I worked at McDonald's, I would try to be passionate about like, hey, I'm working the window today, and I want to make everyone who comes by like, they have a good time.
You're a special guy, though. You're a special person, Alex. I know that just from following you over the years. That you're the anomaly in that regard. The passionate McDonald's worker.
Thank you. I mean, he's just like, and I'm not sure what. I mean, the context in which I was working at McDonald's is also unique because it was like between different projects. But there was just a point in my life where basically I decided that I don't know. I spent like the first 18 years of my life just like normal, like, hey, play a lot of video games, which I still like doing. Play a lot of video games. Didn't have like didn't spend too much time thinking about the future.
Yeah, that's a good segue. Tell me about young Alex and where a little bit of your background and elementary school age or even younger, what you remember about that period in your life.
God, yeah, it's like basically everything before college isn't like the most fascinating thing in the world. Like basically there's some interesting stuff mostly relating to my parents, but bottom line, like my mom's from Guatemala, my dad's from Puerto Rico, they met in Connecticut, and suddenly I came into being. And if you hear a bird in the background, that is my cockatiel Wally. So if anyone's wondering if they hear that.
Yeah, I thought it was maybe like a dog toy or something. Your wife was squeezing a dog toy, or a dog was playing with a squeezy toy.
No, it's my cockatiel. I had a cockatiel growing up as well. But as for being a kid, basically, I spent most of my time indoors, playing video games. I wasn't like my mom had no trouble raising me because I did not want to go out and like cause trouble because I was just like kind of lazy.
You're funny.
So I just love staying at home, and plus, like what happens is that my mom and my dad split at a very young age, and my mom coming out of that was going through like a lot, financially, and whatnot. So basically, like I don't think it was like a conscious thing, but I kind of like ended up growing up a lot faster to help like to not put any additional stress on my mom.
Sure.
So I think my brother got to be a kid a little bit longer than I did. Even though I'm still a kid in a lot of ways.
That's not necessarily a bad thing. It has a negative connotation, I guess. But in talking to so many people, it seems like we're all trying to get back to the sort of childhood wonder that we looked at the world from that point of view. As adults, we lose that. And we're constantly trying to find that through.
Agreed.
I don't know. Through whatever.
Agreed. I always say there's good things and bad things about being a child. Like we want to be childlike, to have that sort of like optimism, imagination towards the world. but we don't want to necessarily be childish. That's short, like the temper tantrums, the short patience that you might have as a child.
Dude, I'm learning this like right now. It took me so long to figure all this out, I feel like. But like what you're describing is like should have trying to figure out in the last like 5-6 months, maybe.
Well, there we go. I mean, but it's life's a journey. Life's a journey. We're constantly discovering these things. Like there's a lot of things that like I discovered, like a lot of things just about sort of like wisdomish things. I feel like I figured those things out fairly early on. But like things about just like normal like interaction with other people are things that took me like a really long time to figure out.
Yeah, I got one for you. I got a good one. You can be silly, but you don't have to be immature.
Correct. It's good to be playful.
Right.
But it's also good to be like situationally aware and things like that.
Yeah.
It's a mix of things. And again, we learned those things.
Dude, I need a time machine.
I know. Oh man. If I all the decisions I would have made, I mean, I wouldn't have made that many decisions differently, but I would have definitely eaten healthier. that is probably my
we all would have been better at everything.
Yeah. But that was my childhood basically until I turned 18. Basically what happened is that I decided I randomly chose to go to college in Ohio. I grew up in Connecticut and I went to college in Bowling Green, Ohio. So I never actually visited the college till the day I moved in. I just thought the name Bowling Green was an amusing name.
You went to the college for a name?
Yeah. I had I knew nothing about the school. I was just like, hey, I'll go here. So I went there. It turned out it was perfect. It was like tailored for me because it had like, I was really I'm still in the music, but I was like passionate about music at the time. And they had like 2 college radio stations. They had the only pop culture library in the country. You could actually major in popular cultures, which is what I ended up majoring in. It was just like, it turned out to be this really cool, and they had like this world-class music school there. And I would go back and like check out people's like tuba recitals and different, like one of the coolest things I ever saw was someone like beatboxing while they played a mandolin. It was just like, it turned out to be like a really great place to be for those 4 years. And because I was kind of like all alone and away from like family and all that, it really kind of forced me to like get out of my shell and figure things out. And there were some times like there was like a brief time where I was homeless during that time because and it's not like I could just go back home and commute to class. So I had to like figure things out. So it put me through a lot of situations that kind of forced me to learn a lot of stuff earlier on in life, which benefited me later on. Like, and that's like a theme in my life where like a lot of things happen in my life, whether it was like my mom and my father's relationship or me being sort of far away from college and making a lot of really random decisions that put me in situations where I had to grow up more than you would normally have to grow up at certain points in my life that have really kind of benefited me to be sort of in the mindset that I'm in.
Interesting. Tell me more about your musical history, because you said you got very passionate about music in college. Were you passionate about music before then? And what about have your music taste just always been evolving, or are they just broad, or what's your favorite kind of stuff? Like, tell me about your music history, I guess.
Like basically, I grew up listening to whatever my mom listened to, which was mainly like, I always say I was raised basically on Billy Joel, Queen, and David Bowie. And
sounds good to me. I mean, I'm Long Island Jewish guy. Billy Joel is like our Bruce Springsteen or whatever, what Jersey has and all that.
I love Billy Joel. But basically, I was raised on that. And then what happened is that like Napster happens.
Right.
And then I start really getting into music with the band Incubus. They come out with their album Make Yourself. And I really enjoyed it. And then I went back and listened to their album Science, which was just amazing. And then that got me interested in being able to find all these older songs with Napster. Got me really interested in just like finding other bands with Napster. And mp3.com was a thing. And bands were putting up their songs for free on mp3.com, like really like local bands. So I was listening to like all these bands from all over the place and getting exposed to all sorts of different types of music. It was really cool. And so like in my 16th birthday, I get a job as a waiter. It's my first job. I only ended up being a waiter for like 3 days because I was the only waiter for like a diner with like 11 tables, and I had no idea what I was doing. So after the third day, they're like, "Yeah, Alex, this isn't working out." And so what happens? They give me my paycheck, and on the way home, there's a music store. I stop by and buy a guitar, and then I get home and I'm like, "Mom, I got fired today, and I bought a guitar. I'm gonna get a guitar." Exactly what every parent wants to hear.
Yeah, that's it's I mean, cliche is not the right word because I like it, but it's just like it's perfect. It's quintessential. That's better.
Yeah. It's just one of those things. Like it was like such a like you couldn't ask for like such a perfect series of events to happen to be like exactly what your mom wants to hear. And she was very supportive about it. But I started playing guitar, and I started playing more and more guitar. And then when I went to college, I started doing more and more guitar, and actually started like doing more like singer songwriting type stuff, and getting involved with the local radio station, and being like a radio DJ, which was also great because I had access to all the newest albums every week. So I'd bring in my laptop every week and just like rip every album. And I just had like binders and binders of like MP3s for like every.
Do you still have all that stuff?
I don't know where that is right now. I wish. There's a couple songs that are like having burning a hole in my mind.
You
like,
said you don't know, or is that it's boxed up somewhere? Like all that?
It's boxed up somewhere. I've moved around a lot.
Yeah.
Like during my college years and post-college years. So like I have a lot of boxes in other people's places.
Oh man, that's
So
oh,
like boy. I had this one red guitar that ended up traveling around like 5 different people, and then eventually like I went to some party and at some random person's house, and they're like, "There's the guitar," and I'm like, "Oh wow, that thing got around." So there's pieces of Alex Merced all across the country.
Interesting. Who are your like? Do you have big guitar influences? How did you learn? Did you teach yourself guitar? Like, did you have any? Wanted to play songs? Lessons. What was it?
I took lessons. It was at the same music shop where I bought the guitar, and it was a lot of fun. Basically, I was at the time like really interested in listening to like a lot of the alt rock at the time. So like basically, it was mainly I think Incubus. I'm trying to think of a couple other bands that I might have been listening to a lot at that time. Who was saying I liked a lot of that like sort of California alt rock at the time. And then I did have like my new metal phase at some point. But then my guitar teacher introduced me to things like jam bands, and started learning more about like bands like Government Mule.
Well, there you go.
And then learning about like guitar, I started getting into like guitar virtuosos like Joe Satriani and Steve Vai. I didn't.
You play like those guys too? You play in that style at all?
No, I play like I'm a very non-technical player. Like my thing is like
me.
Yeah, I just enjoy like playing and like getting into like the feeling of playing.
Oh, so, yeah.
Yeah. So it's like most things that I do, like they're oftentimes not very technical, not very precise. But they're very, in a sense, from the heart, in a sense where like when I would actually play original music, I would try the right songs, and I wrote a few songs here and there that were pretty catchy. But when I try to sit down and like make something, it always becomes it's a little formulaic. But 90% of the time when I play concerts, I would just make up literally every song on the spot. I would just play a few chords and just start singing what comes, and it would be like a lot better than any of the songs I would have sit down and try to write. That was like a lot of fun, and it was a very cathartic experience. And that's the same thing when I go like generally when I speak in person or when I do YouTube videos or when I record a podcast, I do very little planning because oftentimes when I try to plan, I'm just not good at like executing it in a very like natural and authentic way. So I've just tried to train myself to be like better at just improvising.
Yeah, I can like tell, and you seems like you speak from your heart, and you're playing your music from the heart the same way. Like where does that come from? That is that from your mom? The like your heart?
Probably. Yeah, probably. Like I can't like if anyone like generally people like will be like, Alex, you're such a nice guy. You're such a sweetheart. And then people meet my mom and like, you're an asshole compared to your mom. Like my mom is basically like me on steroids. Because that's where I got it from. Like she's been through a lot. She's been through hell and back. Like that's why like whenever I take a look at my life and I take a look at any challenge, and the reason why I've always been able to push forward because I take a look at what my mom went through in raising me and my brother, and I'm like, yeah, if she could get through that, like basically coming out of a very rough relationship, coming off in a really rough financial spot, being able to go to college, raise 2 kids, work 2 or 3 jobs to make ends meet, all that process, and then at the end, going from like having negative, like really negative stuff to like having a nice kind of middle class life with a nice house in the suburbs and whatnot. Like she got to that point like right where I was around like 16. So I saw her go from like, crashing wherever she can with anyone who will let her crash, to having a house. And like that was like a very momentous occasion. And at that point I was getting ready for college, but it was like, see my mom go through that was, and she did it all with a smile on her face. She's extremely optimistic, always very cheery, always looking on the bright side of things. Like,
how? Why? Where does she get it from?
I don't know. Like, she maintained a great friendship with my father, despite the very toxic relationship they had at the time. And because she was like, why, she was like a brilliant example, like the things that I believe so much in now, which are like things like forgiveness, kindness. Because she was so forgiving, like it allowed her and my father to move on with their lives and become the amazing people they are today, who both went from a very difficult place to a very great place in their life now, with lots of family around them. Allowed me to kind of be able to connect with all my siblings, because she maintained that relationship, maintained that friendship with my father despite everything. And then also, so just an example of like the power of forgiveness, and also just the power of kindness, because there was a lot of people would underestimate my mom. She's very nice. Her English isn't the best, so people would underestimate her, but she would just deal with it and just keep pushing forward with a smile on her face, and she was always able to keep climbing and keep moving forward. So, and part of it was because she would have so many people who would be her cheerleaders, because she was so kind, because she was such a good person. So seeing sort of like her example was really, really like pivotal in sort of like, yeah, that's like, I don't know if it was quite as like clear to me when I was a child, like thinking, oh, I'm going to be like my mom, but seeing my mom do it made me just come conscious to like do it by modeling her behavior, because that's just what I was exposed to.
Right.
And then as I got older, it made more sense. I'm like, yeah, the reason I'm in this way is because my mom was this way. Yeah, so she was like very pivotal to me being the person I am.
Yeah, that's very cool stuff. Thank you for sharing all that. I appreciate those stories and whatnot, for sure. Like, I feel like I'm being inspired just by listening to like through you, through your mom, through all that stuff. It's like, I don't know, maybe because in my own, I don't complain outwardly a lot, I feel like, but I feel like I complain a lot in my head. You know what I mean? I complain about whatever it is, work, life, careers, personal things. Like, I don't always outwardly complain to people, but I feel like I have that in my head, which is like, is there a difference even? Like, I don't know, to try to stay positive.
Yeah, I mean, we all have those moments. Like, I definitely have those days where I'm like thinking in my head, is like, I wish my life was X, I wish my life was Y, I wish my life was Z. But you try to balance that out, and I try to always remind myself, like one of the things that's like kind of a double-edged sword is that I always live with sort of the thought process in the back of my head, like this paranoia that today's the day I'm going to die. And
I only have that thought a couple of times a week.
Yeah, so it's like I'm always constantly thinking like, well, today's the day like my heart gives out because I ate like something that's like, or whatever. So I'm constantly, and this is another thing that always puts pressure on me to like put stuff out, to do things, because I'm like, well, I'm not going to wait to tell my story later because I might not be around later. So let me say
urgency. Yeah. I don't feel like people act with enough urgency. People are not urgent about anything, especially in Southern California.
Yeah. That's why like I do like enjoy like my death paranoia, because it keeps me living life with urgency. But on the downside, I don't necessarily plan as much as I probably should for the long run, or think. I do make some long-term thinking, but I'm probably better so now than I used to be. But before, like, it was always like, I gotta do it now. I gotta go run for office now. I gotta go record every thought I've ever had now. And I still do, because I don't want to like not wake up one day and then there be some nugget of something that someone could have found some value in that I did not say.
Yeah, you're like me.
Where it can be found. Yeah. It's like, it's this like I exist for this moment. There are thoughts in my head, and I want to make sure that if they can have impact, if they can have influence, that the possibilities out there, because it's documented somewhere.
Yeah, you got to put it out into the universe, my friend.
Correct. And the thing is that like, it's such a rewarding thing, because by putting lots and lots of stuff out there, it's just brought people into my life and exposed me to people that give me all sorts of great opportunities, like being here with you today.
Thank you.
Like those things wouldn't happen if I didn't put myself out there. And so basically it's been nothing but a positive experience. Like, there are some stresses, like I never anticipated that I would be like, running a national political convention. that was a bit of a stressful experience, but but when I look back at it and I'm like, hey, wasn't what wasn't my greatest showing, but I did it. Like, it's hard to not look back and just put a smile and be like, if I died today, the book that could be written is good enough.
Damn, that's good stuff. Well, let's get into this to the second half of your journey and some of the professional stuff and the political stuff. But one more question about you. Were you always like this sort of like perceptive and self-aware? I think it sounds like you even recognize a flaw perhaps that you have is that you're more, I guess, spontaneous and live more in the moment than you do planning wise. But were you always sort of this self-aware, observant sort of? I mean, you talked about growing up fast, so that might be a part of it. But
I think I attribute it. I think I have. Part of it's because I spent a lot of time alone as a kid.
So you learned about yourself.
Yeah, there was like a constant internal dialogue. But like the thing is that like part of it, I think, is because I grew up and I do attribute this to some. And I think I noticed this characteristic in other first generation people, in the sense that like basically all my family above me, they're immigrants, and they had a culture experience that I don't necessarily really relate to.
I see.
At family events, I sometimes feel like an outsider, because it's like we're celebrating all these like norms that are not what I'm used to growing up here in the U.S. But then when I go to like school and I go to other places, and I grew up in I grew up in the poor neighborhood of a sort of very like suburban night town. So I was like the poor kid at the rich school.
In Connecticut.
Yeah. So basically, like I felt out of place there. And then I grew up with my mom. My dad was around here and there, but for the most part, like my dad wasn't there. And so if I'd go to like Cub Scouts or Boy Scouts, like my father wasn't there. So like everywhere I always felt like the odd man out. So when you don't feel like you're part of a group, it's hard not to start noticing, like, because when you're part of a group, your identity gets really tied up in sort of being part of that group. And so you don't see yourself as much, or you don't see yourself as clearly. So feeling sort of this like isolation as a child forced me to kind of just be able to see me, because I'm not part of anything. There's nowhere where I fit. So
things are making sense now. Things are making more and more sense as you're describing this to me.
Yeah. So like I was able to kind of just see myself for who I was in this context, and see like this is how other people are behaving because of their context. It just made a lot of that clear. And it also and then thinking of myself as in that sort of very hyper individual sense, I think does eventually like really play a role into why like things like libertarianism and individualism were so magnetic to the way I think.
That's interesting. Yeah, to be like growing up and seeing like, oh, I recognize the dynamics of another group and feel and sense my separation from not being part of other groups, and being like okay with that, and appreciating your own individualism, and like,
yeah,
like as a young, like growing up and just like, as you're growing up.
Yeah, it worked out, because being always feeling like an outsider, I'm always able to look at everything from the outsider point of view, which gives me a very objective point of view, which is why like sometimes I'll like some people will like think I'm like too hyper neutral in a sense. It's not that I'm neutral, it's just that like I don't feel the same vested interest in that a lot of people may feel when they feel like part of something.
Right.
Like I don't feel part of anything in the sense where like the defense of that thing, the existence of that thing is sort of key to who I am.
Yeah, interesting. Tell me about the towards the end of college and what you thought you would be doing and where we were headed with life at that point in your life.
And originally, when I went to college, I went to be a computer science major because I wanted to make video games. And I changed my major after the first semester because I didn't want to buy a graphing calculator for calculus classes. So I'm like, nope, I'm not. I already spent enough money. I don't have any money. I'm not buying a graphing calculator. So if that's the case, I'm choosing a different major.
It changed my whole life.
Yeah, which is interesting because I eventually ended up going back to programming anyways. So it's like I ended up where I was going anyways. But it worked out. At first I switched to communications. Then I ended up switching to pop culture. I'm like, I wasn't too worried. Like people would normally think of like, what are you going to do with a pop culture degree?
Right.
I wasn't necessarily worried about that because the high school I went to, I didn't go to the normal high school in Manchester, Connecticut. In Connecticut, there's these regional vocational tech schools where you can kind of volunteer to go to, where they teach you a trade. So I was already trained in like microcomputer out of high school. So I already had like a decent set of technical skills that I could always fall back on, which technically that is what I ended up or what kept me afloat over the years. But then I go to study popular culture studies, which at the time I don't really have like I wouldn't say, I mean, I definitely lean left at this point in my life, but I don't necessarily have like a well-formed political ideology. I just know that like when I take a look at most of the issues, I lean on what is perceived as like the left side. Because generally when you're not, if you're like most people, I would say, and I think, and this is the thing about politics, people always be like, why don't they listen to us on these things where they agree with us on? Is because like most people, they don't understand necessarily the dollars and cents, but they do understand the heart side of things. So oftentimes it's like this the social issues that tend to be sort of more salient with most people because they can understand that. You don't have to like have studied economics to understand like people.
Sure.
So, people like, you start talking about taxes, you start talking about trade, people go to sleep. But, you start talking about like people's lives and who's oppressed and who's not oppressed and, what yada, yada, yada. That gets people a little bit more riled up. So I was definitely always kind of like more like the left-leaning side, very concerned about like the treatment of like LGBT people and things like that. So basically, I always thought like that's what I thought I was. I thought it was like a person on the left. I later on discovered I'm not. But what happens is that as a popular culture studies major, like basically all the professors were super left leaning, like far, far, far left. I didn't realize how far left until like now when I go back and think about the things I had to read and whatnot. But I did feel like I gained a lot out of it because what the pop culture degree was you were taking anthropology and sociology, these two topics, instead of studying one or the other, you're studying both of them, but instead of applying it to some like society in the mountains, you're applying it to like normal everyday society. Like, okay, like basically using anthropological and sociological techniques and ideas and theories. What does Harry Potter tell us about the world today? What does, this movie that people like tell us about the society right now?
Interesting. Yeah, that's cool. Like theory stuff, but there's a lot to that.
Yeah, it was really cool because like as going kind of goes back to like being the outsider. Like to me, everyone already, since being the outsider, I look at everybody as these interesting things because since I don't relate, I want to understand them. So basically, learning things like pop culture studies were really fascinating to me because it allowed me to understand other people. At the same time, I started getting really into like self-development books, like the Tony Robbins, the Wayne Dryers, all that stuff, because that also allowed you, because there you're learning about things like neurolinguistic programming, about your own mental state management.
I just recently started, not to cut you off, but I interviewed someone who was telling me about the neurolinguistics. Mm-hmm. It's like the language you use when you communicate with yourself affects how the actions in the world and your behavior kind of things. That's sort of the gist of it.
Kind of, yeah. Like that's part of it. But yeah, like all that stuff was like really fascinating to me because again, it's understanding it requires you to sort of like think about how people work. And then
how do people work? How do I work so I can fucking maximize this being that is me?
Yeah, and I mean part of it was to maximize. I mean, I think part of it was always this feeling that I still hadn't connected with any group or people and whatnot. So I have like a lot of people in my life. I started having a growing number of friends and growing number of things I was involved with. I still never felt at home. So trying to understand that lack of like connection always drove me to want to understand people more. So I get really into that. And then 2008 rolls around and I make a trip to the Philippines. And in the apartment that I rented for the month, and there's a whole bunch of stuff that happened. There's like a gap that I totally just glossed over with a lot of really good stories. But basically when I was there, the only English news channel there was, because this is like during the 2008, like this is early 2007. So this is like the ramp up of like the Democratic primaries, the Republican primaries for the 2008 election. The only channel that was they had on the news was Fox. And, me at this point thinking of myself as this big lefty, I'm thinking, okay, so yes, well, if Fox News is the only thing the rest of the world can see, then no wonder the rest of the world hates us. So I watched this Republican debate. I'm like, this is going to be fun. And I watched it. And then this is like old congressman who's like talking about like how we can end wars and how we need to watch out for people's savings and all this stuff. And I'm like, I think I agree with everything this guy just said. Like, that was interesting. And I didn't think too much about it at the time, but that was also the one with like the Giuliani moment where he confronts Giuliani. This is Congressman Ron Paul. And I didn't think too much about it at the time. I went like enjoyed the rest of my trip. But then when I came back, I started watching more debates and kept finding myself like, I'm like, yeah, everything this guy says just makes sense. I remember like before that, I was thinking, well, this is going to be a fun race between Obama and Giuliani. Giuliani.
He was really the favorite, or the I guess the mainstream rights media's
at the time,
favorite or choice at the time.
Everyone thought that would be the way things went, and no, it did not.
It did not.
So basically, I just started becoming obsessed. I started like watching like every YouTube clip I could of like Ron Paul, and I became that guy, like a guy who's
I like me 3 years later, but yeah.
yeah. Oh my, it was so bad. I mean, in a good way, but it totally changed my life in the sense that like my priorities changed. I suddenly had like, it was just because again, basically with Ron Paul, like he's saying things that make sense, but underrooted is like this whole idea like economics, and economics was just another vector for me to understand how people work, and it was a really compelling one. It made a lot of sense. It just really filled in the gaps. Like sociology and anthropology helped. A lot of like the self-development stuff helped. Like a lot of that stuff filled in different gaps about how people work. But economics really filled in the remaining pieces, and it was just like clarity.
What way? In what way that
I just felt like after that, like that was the missing piece. Like things like emotional intelligence at that point I had already developed, where I can like kind of tell how people feel. Like I can be in a conversation with someone and I can kind of realize, okay, this is how they're responding, this is how they're feeling. Okay, I need to tone down, tone up, and respond appropriately. But understanding like motivation and like the shades of gray in motivation. A lot of that was with marginal thinking and marginal ideas like marginal utility and economics, were just mind shattering. And I had taken an economics course beforehand, and all of that had just not really like sat with me as it did after learning about Ron Paul. And when I learned about Ron Paul, I ended up reading a couple books by Robert Murphy and Tom Woods that went deeper into it, reading Henry Hazlitt, reading Mises, reading Rothbard, reading Hayek, just reading this whole like spattering. I was obsessed. And then that's when I started my YouTube channel, because I just wanted to like scream at the rooftops of this like new way of thinking I had found that I felt like, why did I never hear about this before? Why did people keep this a secret from me for so long?
And it was economics, especially that the area that you were like kind of most passionate about at this time.
It was economics was the thing that really kind of hooked me in, but it really was like overall libertarianism as a whole over the years has really been something that like really was something I am very passionate about. Like I would say between like 2008 to 2012 was really the economic side of things. Like the first couple thousand videos on my YouTube channel were just me talking about like economics and philosophy, a lot of philosophy as well. But it was just like basically an immersion of me in like just the tradition, and just learning about and being, making donations to the Ron Paul campaign in 2008 and 2012 and doing some phone banking here and there. But really it was just like me just learning and absorbing information. Then I was like, in 2013, I was like an ambassador for the Seasteading Institute, because at that point that's when I kind of hit like sort of like my most radical point, where I was basically like a radical anarcho-capitalist, very just like, hey, you know what? We just need to be a world of individuals with no violence. And I still, at the core, like I still
with no violence. Is that what you said?
Yeah. I mean, that's basically the basic idea is like, like we can live in a world where basically we have a rule where basically you don't aggress on others. And I still believe like that's a good rule.
Sure.
And less rules are better than more rules.
Sure.
So the idea is you want to have very simple, easy to understand rules. And I believe all that, except like I'm less absolutist about like what's possible. So there was a time when I first started where I was like more, let's say minarchist, where I would be like, okay, well, we need to be a lot more freer than we are today, but you maybe still need government for X, Y, and Z. And then I went to the opposite extreme where I'm like, you just don't need any government, period. And now I'm kind of at a point in my life where it's like I'm no longer interested in talking about necessarily government. I'm more interested in talking about people, regardless of what government is there, how big or small it is, to get to the world that I want to get to still requires that we as individuals choose to be better to each other, to be kinder, to be more forgiving, and those things. And if we focus on that, how we are with each other, a lot of that other stuff kind of changes. A lot of our institutions will change with that. So I'm much more concerned with like modeling behavior and trying to inspire people to be their best selves. Less so than I'm about like as much about sort of like the political action that I used to be.
Well, where everyone is always talking about, especially in the liberty world and the whole podcast and that world, about culture influencing the politics, that the culture comes first. And I think that's part of it, of the culture, is how we treat each other and how we act and how we treat ourselves. And you're talking about the hardest things too, I think. Forgiveness, you didn't say it, but patience is something I've heard you mention earlier, and empathy I've heard you talk about in other interviews and things like that. Those are the hardest things for us humans.
It is.
What do you want from us?
I just, basically, the more I think about sort of the impetus for violence, because at the end of the day, to me as a libertarian, it seems to me like
kindness.
Well, kindness
was the other one, yeah.
Unkindness, yes, kindness is very important. But like, how do we get to a point where we want to hurt someone? Generally, most people don't act like you have your random psychopath here and there, but most people don't want to hurt other people. The only time they feel like they need to resort to violence, they're oftentimes seeing it as defense. So oftentimes, like, someone does something violent, they're seeing it as that they're defending something or whatnot. So the question is, why do they feel like they need to defend themselves? It's because they're scared of something. Why are they scared, and where does fear come from? And how does fear and how quickly fear can turn to hate? And hate is oftentimes, when you're looking at something else as something that will never not be a threat. So that's what hate is. You dislike something because you perpetually see it as a threat. So you perpetually, that fear has crossed this line. So you just being, this thing shouldn't exist. So the thing is that, like, if you have a politics that's driven by fear, which is the nature of electoral politics.
Yeah, unfortunately, yes.
Yeah, that's going to naturally drive hate. So that's why, I always kind of kept leaning towards sort of like political decision making tends to sort of like undermine what most people would see as its goals. And, like, and it gets a little complicated because it goes back and forth. Like, there is an argument to say that for, like, let's say, if you have people vote on something, if everyone has some mechanism to which they feel like they are participating, they're going to, in society, then they're going to be less likely to want to destroy society. So like, in the sense that, like, hey, everyone does this like ceremony of going to a box and stuffing a piece of paper inside of it every 4 years. Like that can tangentially kind of give people some sort of buy-in into this idea of society to want to preserve it. And it's
that's an interesting point, whether you're adamantly in love with voting or not a fan of it as being, a big thing that should be part of our political process. Like that it does kind of, I guess, sometimes keep us from destroying each other, but I don't know.
I can
see thought.
Like I can see that argument, but at the same time, like if that act is so consequential where it can decide things like what property I get to keep, whether I get to live, things like that, then what's going to happen is that the stakes are so high that the people who can benefit from those high stakes are going to naturally drive fear. And then that gets us back to where society, like, so like, if you don't have a mechanism for people to feel participating in society will fall apart. But if that mechanism does anything of consequence, it'll tear society apart. So it's like, you end up in this situation where, like, there isn't a perfect balance, and that's fine. Like that's really, like, I think that's part of where I think a lot of people make a mistake in their thinking, where they're trying to create something perfect, because that's like, I used to want to create something perfect, but that's not how history works. History works where, even in my own life, like, I make mistakes and then I do it better. I'm never going to do it perfect. I'm going to keep making mistakes, but I keep doing it a little bit better each time. So same thing with society. We don't need to build a perfect society that will last forever. Every society will eventually fall. The thing is that we learn lessons along. It's just humanity, long as humanity persists, humanity will keep learning lessons for every rise and fall, and we'll keep getting a little bit closer. So that's sort of like we're naturally kind of going towards the right place. Makes everything seem like a little less consequential than things used to be to me. Now I focus more like on the consequences I know I can change right now. I know I can impact like my students and whether like how good their life will be by teaching them and training them to be the best coders they can be. I can, tell a funny joke to my wife and make her laugh and make her day a little bit better. Like these are changes I can make right now, and I know will have an effect to those people right now. I still think political action is very important because if you need to hold the institutions that exist accountable. Like, hey, if no one cares, because hey, in the long run, if no one cares, then we just don't pay attention to what's going on in the world, and people can get away with some really horrible stuff.
Yeah, like what's happened in reality.
Exactly. Like people can get away with some really horrible stuff. So people need to be involved. But do I less look at political action as a mechanism for creating a perfect society? No. I look at the interactions I have with other people and the influence it can have on them. Thus, in turn, they can have influence on other people as much more the mechanism for how I can create that better society. And then political action more is just say, like, you know what, shitty things are going to happen. You have to be involved to make sure they just happen less. So
I'm with you. I'm like in that like mindset that like I'm sure TK Coleman and all of his work and all that. Like all the stuff on focusing on personal development and interpersonal relationships and yourself and impact. The idea of having impact. And what I was going to sort of ask or comment on is like I feel like obviously this has been your personal journey that you're describing, but I feel like maybe even the broader libertarian liberty movement, Ron Paul sort of influence is sort of becoming more of that in a sense that we're focused more on what impact can we have and just like not worrying as much about the bullshit in going on,
Yeah, and I think
not thinking it's hard to not make politics about politics, if that makes sense. But I think just focusing on making impact and impacting culture, I think we're in that sort of mindset and trying to, I think, in a collective way somehow exhibit the kindness, the patience, the empathy, and whatever the hell the other thing I'm missing is.
Yeah, and then that's like one of the ththings I think when you ask people like what do they remember about Ron Paul, like what made them excited about Ron Paul, oftentimes they'll point out like, well, he always stuck to principle throughout the whole time. He always voted no on every bill that was unconstitutional. They'll point out to like sort of like his rigidness. But to me, that wasn't like Ron Paul's biggest selling point. It was who he was as a person. That he was such a, like the fact that he was such a nice guy, that he would exercise every day, the life he lived.
Right.
And the fact that
I'm aware of all these things too, for sure.
Yeah. Like those were the things that really, really like that's, and this is like why sometimes I'll talk about the idea of being an aspirational libertarian, where you promote ideas by being somebody who other people might want to be. Because even if they want to, like, if they aspire to be you because, hey, you're successful, but the thing is that they don't know what makes you successful. So they might think, hey, the ideas that you have. So the ideas about like liberty and individualism, if those are ideas you have, but people are aspiring to you, they're going to examine your ideas and they're going to look at those ideas. Like you meet, like, when someone you like tells you something, you're going to assume you're going to give them a little bit more credit and a little bit more benefit of the doubt.
That's how celebrities have the power they do, I think, over our culture. And that's how that's how it all works. And even like it's part of, I guess, production value also, but like that's production value. A fan having a fancy celebrity is something with a production value. So whatever the hell that person says is going to carry weight to the person watching it on TV.
And it does matter. Like at the end of the day, like the context in which you consume information alone. Like, for example, there are products out there, like products where, I see a commercial for the same product, two different companies who are producing the same product. One commercial is just a lot nicer. And honestly, that's probably the one I'm going to buy. Because I gotta, just even if it's the shittier product, and that's the thing. Like, everyone always says like, well, I don't need to learn how to present my ideas better. I don't need to do this and this, because libertarianism should just sell itself. Nothing sells itself. Absolutely nothing. No matter how great something is, you have to put some thought into like, how do I sell this thing?
God damn it! You're giving me a tough lesson as a person who's got a few endeavors that I'm working on. Giving me the dad speech. I'm interpreting it as no one's waiting for you. You got to sell yourself. I appreciate hearing all this. This is all like good stuff that's like helpful to me in my life. I don't know, man. It's like meant. Yeah, it's good that I'm having this conversation right now at this moment in time. I think.
I'm glad I'm having it, and I'm glad all these words are hope will hopefully have an impact on you, and hopefully anyone who's listening to this, our conversation has an impact on them.
And that's why I want. Thank you, and that's cool, and that's like why I reached out to you, because I like your whole vibe and attitude and how you've approached like sort of like your pitch to your libertarian pitch to other people who are going to be skeptical has always come from a place of, trying to understand where the other person is coming from, rather than just screaming your political views at someone, which is a lesson I think we've all had to learn over the years. But
and I've been there too. Like I used to, like, if you watch my early YouTube videos, I just screamed it. Like I just screened my point of view and derided every other point of view as like cynically would just brush them aside and like portray them as like extreme versions of themselves. But then I realized, like, if I don't try to understand people, why should they try to understand me?
Yeah. No, 100%. Why don't you tell me a little bit more about, some of the specific things you've gotten involved with, and some of the things you ran for, some of the highlights. We've talked a lot, I realize already, and I appreciate that. But I wanted you to definitely share some of the rest of your journey, and I'll just kind of give you the floor to go through it.
God, as far as like the sort of the I guess I'll do a quick, very because there's a lot to cover.
Right.
I'll go through all the highlights of my life.
Yeah, your professional stuff. Yeah.
So first we'll start with my college years. In my college years, the first couple of years were just straight up me being a young college kid discovering myself. But then what happens is I become a resident advisor in my junior year. And during those years, I learned how to become a concert promoter. So I was promoting a lot of concerts at the local bars with a lot of my favorite bands, because I didn't drive. So I was like, hey, if I want to go see a concert, I can't always expect that someone's going to give me a ride to the show. And so what I started doing is promoting concerts and bringing my favorite bands to me. And the cool thing is, like, I would occasionally get to earn some money doing it, so it wasn't a bad deal. So I got to hang out with a lot of bands, and basically, it was a very cool experience. But then what happened is, as an RA, like, the college wasn't thrilled with this, because I was promoting events at bars where people drank. So they're like, this is a conflict. We have some issues with you doing this. And then they caught me like using the office printer to print out some flyers. So they let me go. So the second time I've been fired. But what happens is that when you're an RA, they pay for your housing. So like basically I had to leave like housing. So basically I had some money. My mom, would normally have this like money she would give me for like my room and board for that semester. But then, I felt a little like disappointed in myself to be in that position where I was let go. My buddy, he had just gone out of a long relationship, and he was kind of feeling like he had something to prove. So we started talking, like, we decided instead of like to start a business. So I took the money that I had for a place to live and got some credit cards, and we started, and he put some money together, and we opened up like a little comic book store / LAN gaming center by the campus. But that meant I had no home. So I had a store, but no home. So I was living in the back of the store on a futon. And then every few days I would go to my buddy's place and like take a shower. But basically I would just sleep in the store, and basically I'd open up the store at like noon every day, and then they would close up at midnight every night. And then I was also taking a full load of classes at college. And that was a fabulous experience. I mean, I'm still shocked that I somehow got out of that, somehow had that experience and not walked out of it with more debt than I did. But I got out, but it lasted like 7 months. It became 2 stores, because we ended up like merging with this other business that was in Sandusky, Ohio. Like,
wow. It grew?
It grew really quick. The problem is, like, we got cocky and started like kept spending the money to keep growing without realizing, hey, eventually, like, sometimes there might not be the same level of business coming in. So we didn't have
Right.
any money saved up for when that happened. So one of the stores got closed. I said, "Hey, I'm done. I'm graduating soon. Just cash me out, whatever." And then the other store stuck around for a little bit longer. They eventually sold it to somebody else. Then my other two business partners, they eventually started another store, and they were very successful at that because a lot of lessons learned. Me, I just, I didn't want to stick around in Ohio after graduation.
Are these stores still open today?
Probably what they used to, not the one that I started. That became a bookstore. That's like, and I don't know what it is now, but
Yeah.
it was a bookstore for a bit right across college. But then what happened is that like I was like not in the best place after that. I was a little sad that the store closed because it was just like it's like another thing, another sad ending.
Sure.
So what I did is I bought a ticket to the Philippines. Like this is how I ended up going to the Philippines. So basically I bought a ticket and I didn't have money for that. I just bought it, put it on a credit card. It's like, I'll figure it out later. But I wanted something because basically what I had to do is, this is when I work at McDonald's. So I go from running a store to working at McDonald's. And the funny thing is that at McDonald's, one of my coworkers was also someone who owned our competitor. So there's this other store that was our competitor. And we would just we weren't fans of each other because we had competing stores. Apparently we drove each other out of business. And then we both ended up working at McDonald's and becoming really good friends, talking about the old days when we were owning competing stores.
This was someone who this was the guy who owned the other store.
Yeah.
Just worked at it. It was one of the other owners.
Yeah.
And he also ended up at this McDonald's.
Yes.
What the hell?
Awesome. I know. I told you, like, if I die tomorrow, the book's decent.
Oh man!
But basically, so I worked at McDonald's, and it was a really good experience. Like the thing is that, like, after owning a store, working at McDonald's was a very different experience because I'm no longer just looking at it as a job. I'm like paying attention to like how the McDonald's is run and like paying attention to like what works. And
I see. I see. This is what's keeping you engaged.
Yeah. So like it's really interesting to see like how they train
the operation.
People. Yeah, like I had a much deeper appreciation for those things. So it was all very fascinating. But then I go to the Philippines. I see Ron Paul. I come back, and then I eventually graduate. And I come back. I come to New York. I go to New York. I get a job as an intern in like this fashion marketing company, which was a lot of fun. Made a lot of my initial friends in New York there. I become a stockbroker for a hot second, and then I get hired by this company that trains stockbrokers, Greco Financial Training, and that's where I worked for 10 years. So I ended up training people, like literally, and then that job took me all around the world. I got to go to Amsterdam, go to Canada, all sorts of places, training people.
Wow.
And I had no background in finance. I just happened to be really knowledgeable about economics at the time because of Ron Paul. And two, I had just passed my stockbroker licensing exam, so that's kind of the thing I'd be training people on. So it just kind of worked out. I was in the right place at the right time. Story of my life. So then part of it was just putting myself out there. Like when I applied for jobs, I would just apply for any job. Like I didn't even realize I had applied for this job because I was literally just going down Craigslist and going down the list and just sending my application to everybody because I figured, hey, it's a numbers game. At the end of the day, everything's a numbers game. So like if I want to guess, I need to get 100 no's first. Oh
boy, I'm gonna have to make another drink over here. A drink.
So it's like everything else. So like, I try to approach everything in life that way. I just keep the more until I get a lot of attempts out of the way really quickly. But I got that job and it was a great experience. And it was a wonderful decade where I got to learn about finance. I got to be in the heart. I got to literally like teach classes in the Federal Reserve. So I got to literally like critique the Federal Reserve from within the Federal Reserve.
The one in Washington, D.C. or the New York? The New York branch, yeah.
Yeah, because we were like literally right next to that.
Well, some would say that's the main branch anyway.
It's the main one. It's really like the heart and soul of the system. But yeah, like that was like literally my backyard. Like every day when I was at work, I look out the window and there was a Federal Reserve. And it was fascinating working down on Wall Street. But during that time, I'm getting involved with like doing my YouTube channel. 2013, 2012, 2013, I'm involved with the Seasetting Institute.
And you're working at the Federal Reserve at the same time. Is that not a weird thing?
Oh, I'm not working at the Federal Reserve.
Yeah.
We'll teach classes there because we'll do like we do these programs where we'll tutor people across all like the major financial institutions in New York City. So we take them to the New York Stock Exchange, take them to the Federal Reserve, take them to all these places.
I see, because it's sort of maybe a conflict of interest as a Ron Paul supporter libertarian. I imagine because we're not. as far as I understand, not huge fans of
No, it
of
was
the
really
Federal
interesting.
Reserve and their existence and what they do and all
Yeah,
these kinds of things, their
it was
power.
great. I would be able to criticize open market policy like within those walls.
Right. I think
Awesome.
that's what I wanted to confirm.
Yeah. No. I trained a lot of people libertarians during teaching all those classes.
Within the belly of the beast.
Within the belly of the beast, I was there on Wall Street training new hires, and there was like kids who were just like out of high school, people who were just out of college, and I was fronted, and basically they had to listen to me talk for 40 hours straight, so they got to hear me.
That's awesome, and
spiel.
you're passing this information and knowledge on to kids and helping them, develop, with their own personal development and academic career and whatnot.
It was cool. I mean, the industry got less and less interesting over the years, partly due to the regulation, partly due to other things, but eventually I kind of started losing interest in it. So that's why I ended up switching over to coding. Plus I want to like leave New York, which hopefully I'll do soon. But then what happens is in 2013, in the New York City Libertarian Party, at this point I hadn't been involved in the Libertarian Party yet. But what happens is that a guy by the name of Roger Stone tries to take over the New York City Libertarian Party and put in his own candidates. So this is like the same Roger Stone, like everyone knows, with like Donald Trump and all that stuff. But what happens is that it causes this whole disarray with their nominations. So they had no candidates after everything was said and done. So they needed the person who was originally going to run for borough president of Brooklyn, Michael Sanchez, became the mayoral candidate. And now they needed a candidate for public advocate, which is like the vice mayor kind of thing. So he knew that I lived in New York City and was apparently a fan of my podcast and stuff. And it was like, hey, Alex, like, you're a guy. Would you want to be the candidate? And like, I never thought about it, but sure. So I ran for that. I did mostly in the social media type campaign. I would just join every Facebook group that had anything to do with New York City and just like spam them. Basically, it was much smoother. Like I would create like targeted ads.
Sure. So I believe you.
So for like the New York City swinger, like the New York City swing dancing group, I would create like ads about like cabaret laws that prevented dancing in bars, or like from others groups, I would do like for like parenting groups, I would do like school choice type stuff. So I would just do all these like targeted ads.
Yeah, you're related to that's smart. You're doing it right.
And then I ended up getting like in the grand scheme of how many votes are casted in the election, not a high total, but for candidates running on the Libertarian line, I got the highest vote total, with like over 10,000 votes. That number has been beaten since, but only once. But I got the highest vote total in that election, so like that was a good first showing. And then what happens is that a couple years later, Schumer's up for re-election, and I'm like, there's two people who I always wanted to run against. Like, there's two people who were like the people who I'd want to run against. Anthony Weiner, who took care of himself, so I didn't get that opportunity. And he was in my district, so like technically I would have had the chance had he not done what he did. But
I would like to see you take him down in some sort of debate. That would have been fun to watch.
Yeah. Now he's taking all the fun out of it. But I mean, then there was Chuck Schumer. Chuck Schumer was the other person who was like this sort of like political figure that represented like the worst, like to me, like just like a politician's politician.
It amazes me that people, on the left, like never seem to be able to recognize it. It's just so much that in politics that we hate the enemy so much. We don't even see that this guy is just like a corrupt career, slimy politician who just represents corporate interests. Am I wrong about any of this about Chuck Schumer? He seems like just the establishment, creep.
Yeah, but I mean, the thing is that like the vast majority of people are not ideological. Like most people, even people who vote on the left, they're not actual lefties. They're just people who vote with whatever seems to make the most sense at the time. And basically, when you see a senator who, like, regardless of whether you believe with any kind of philosophical anything, like you see, hey, he brought in some money for this thing. He brought in some money for, even though most of that money doesn't really go to like most people, but to like contractors and different like special interests. Like people, he can still take credit for that stuff, and he's a
brand. He's a known entity, a known quantity, a known whatever. They're brands. Like
he's phenomenal. Well, I mean, I'll give Schumer credit that he's phenomenal at branding himself. He's phenomenal at just like being in the right places and being right in the right place and take the right credit for the right things, and just kind of always be there shaking the right hand, getting the right photo ops. Like he's good like that. But
good at politics.
He's good at politics. I can't fault him for that. But basically, I ran. I had to run in the primary. I won the primary. I ran the race. I got a decent vote total again. Not the highest vote total ever, but a fairly decent vote total. I think it was like the third or second highest statewide vote total for a Libertarian Party candidate that wasn't running as president. So that was pretty cool. So then I did one more go around like the next year as comptroller, where I did well in the sense like I improved versus the previous run for comptroller. So like I think the previous run for comptroller got around 5,000 votes. I ended up getting like 7,000. So it was improvement.
Is it more? Is it more than an educational thing and to spread the ideas? Is that the goal with the campaigns, or is it to gain it? It's like what is the?
It has to be all of the above because you have to run with the intention of winning.
Sure.
It requires a lot of it takes a lot out of you physically and it takes a lot out of you financially. So you have to kind of run with like the hope that a miracle happens and that you can win, and you have to talk to people as if you're going to win. Because if you don't believe in yourself, then how are you going to be compelling and communicating anything? But at the same time, you have to also realize that like a benefit of what you're doing is education, and try not to lose your message. So that way, if you don't win, at least you have the benefit of actually educating people on the issues. Like that's what happens. Like sometimes people focus too much on winning and they lose their message, and sometimes people focus too much on the message, but they don't believe in what they're doing enough that their message gets across either.
Yo, you know who was good at that balance? What's his name? Ron Paul. I think he was able to do that fairly well. What you're describing.
He was pretty good. He was pretty good. I mean, he like the thing about Ron Paul is I think the reason why he was able to connect with like young people so much, because I know like when he connected with me at a very young age, is when you're growing up, everyone is always telling you that you just need to stop, you just need to start being realistic. You need to start and basically telling you that you need to stop believing. You need to stop having ideals. You need to stop being idealistic.
Even if it's not told to you overtly, says this is what society's message is to us.
Correct. So when you see somebody at that age who's been able to live their whole life and still hold on to that idealism, like that is powerful. Like, and I think it's the same thing with the appeal for.
Dude, that's true. You hit the nail on the head.
Yeah, like it basically as a young person, it's telling you that you don't have to give in. You don't have to break.
I will never.
Yeah, so like that's a powerful message. That doesn't necessarily resonate with people who already broke. That resonates with people who haven't yet. And that's why I think people like Bernie and Ron Paul, they really clicked with young people because they both, even though they had very different messages, they both, they were both people who stuck to their guns and never their ideals never broke from years and years and years. Like what they believe never had to change. Like society never broke down to the point where they just gave in. Bernie maybe a little bit lately, but
yeah,
I think he's kind of finally broke. But up until that point, and I mean, when Bernie first got big a couple of years ago, that was a very similar thing, but to younger people on the left. But I think to me, that's what Ron Paul represented. It was this idea that society doesn't have to break you down, and that's very compelling to a young person. And which is also why there was the ceiling, which is why the numbers were never bigger, because the majority of the voting population are the cynical, are the broken. Because people break and then they just start voting okay, who's going to give me more stuff, and they no longer believe or feel like they should, so their behavior changes. So it is what it is. But again, I do still believe that political action is important to try to mitigate that as much as possible. And for those people who are cynical, you just have to convince them that, hey, good ideas aren't just good ideas because there's something you believe in, but they're good ideas even if you don't believe them. Okay, freedom is just a good idea that benefits you, and you do have to with those people, you have to focus on the benefits and what they're going to get out of it.
Yeah,
they're not gonna do it out of warm fuzzy feelings for
show them tangible results with your theories and philosophies and ideas and practice. Agreed. As well as always is always helpful. And what about where do we go from there?
You basically you do all the above. You have to live the best life you can because you have to inspire the young people so that way they don't break. But then for the people who are broken, you got to show them that, hey, even if you don't want to believe, even if you can't believe, there are practical reasons. So take a look at what we're saying.
No, that's all good stuff. I really meant like in the last, I guess, few years with your life. Like where did we go in
Oh,
your journey? It's all
well,
good.
I mean, my story, my libertarian story, kind of climaxed last summer. Basically the end of my term as vice chair, and due to a very interesting turn of events, I had to serve. I had to chair the National Libertarian Convention.
Yeah, I was there. I was a delegate on the live stream.
Oh, how was it?
You did well. You were able to wrangle the herd like of
That
crazy
was
people yelling. It's almost like it's kind of like it was a online, but like a part in person. I guess I don't even remember. I'll let you describe it. But you did a good job. You had a very tough job. A lot of people coming at you with crazy questions and
yeah, and I
procedural
mean,
things that are beyond me.
and that's part of the course. Like that's part of the course where like I've been to national conventions before, and it's part of the course. This one was like a little bit extreme because you go into the convention knowing this is going to be this battle up front. Like you know that there's a couple little like landmines that are clearly going to happen. There's nothing you can do about them. They're going to be a conflict, and everyone's going to think that like you know everyone's going to think that hey, if I had just given into their side, that we would have just moved faster. Problem is like basically, and that's a tough thing. That was a tough thing to deal with. That first day was rough, but going into it, like I couldn't. I need to maintain that because it's not just about that moment; it's about the whole 3 days. And the thing is that, like, if I had just sit there and said, "Okay, well, I'm going to just side with this side of the argument," and I'm just going to bend over backwards for them, you know, or made it feel like where basically one side didn't matter to me as much as the other side. I'm gonna have half that room hating you the next 3 days, and then nothing's gonna get done. So the trick, the balance, especially in this environment where you're in a room where you really couldn't hear anybody because like that room we were in this giant room and it was like really echoey because of like the social distancing. So even and then on top of it, like everyone like whether they were muting themselves on the Zoom room, that was a whole fun thing trying to manage that. It was like it was definitely like I don't know if anyone will ever have to go through an experience like that again to that extreme. But that's pretty much, and for someone who never really ran a meeting on a small scale before, like I had never done like a Robert's Rules anything before.
Wow.
So that was like aside from like the first half, the online half, the end of the online half of the convention.
I assume you had some experience in that.
No, that was really my first time doing it like that. like that was a real deal trial by fire.
That's funny.
like I was nervous. I was so I was just literally just reading Robert's Rules for like weeks before that, making calls. It was really like I luckily I tried to be as humble about it as possible, and everyone who was on that stage with me, the whole group up there on stage, I mean, we all work together. Like I don't think anyone will ever appreciate the stress of being on that stage and the minute to minute, like literally things were changing minute to minute. Things were breaking as far as technology goes because that was going to be hard even if all the technology worked right. But then like the online platform started falling apart. We were having like different like Zoom issues.
I can only imagine. Like I saw some of this. Yeah.
Yeah. So it was literally like improvising minute to minute, like literally minute to minute. We're like reinventing the wheel. And but it works. Like we got through it. Like
that's exactly. I was going to say like we got through it. Like it's even the major parties. I think if they had to do part online, part in person, I think with all their money that they would have some issues too. It was a challenging thing.
Yeah, it was interesting. It was basically having to chair probably the trickiest convention to ever be chaired as someone who's never chaired anything before. But it went better than I would have ever expected. Like it wasn't perfect. Like there was a lot of stuff on the agenda that I would have liked that we got into. Although if you've ever been to any other national convention, there's oftentimes a lot of the agenda that doesn't get gotten to. So at least this time we were able to elect our at-large delegates and the judicial committee, which wasn't something that we could say about prior conventions. But again, everything in context, I'm very proud of of how those days went, and I'm very proud of everyone. And it wasn't just. I mean, I was actually only a small part of it. Like the convention committee did an amazing job planning all that. To like the people on stage with me, Dan Fishman, Karen Ann Harlows, the parliamentarian whose name is escaping me at the moment.
I know who you're thinking about. The dude who was like helping with the explaining the rules or whatever, like kind of the rule dude.
Yeah.
Who knew the procedure? Kind of a.
He's a great guy.
His name was like Bob or something like that. It's like one of those kind of names.
Escaping at the moment. But like, he was amazing. Like he really was like by my side, like during that whole thing. Like,
yeah, it was like an older. He was an older gentleman, I think.
And then someone joined us, Data Logan, who wasn't even like originally planned to be on stage. He just kind of got involved, and he was also extremely helpful. And it was just like. And then the credentials committee with Susan Hogarth, like, because there was also credentialing issues. It was like all sorts of stuff, like, because it was just this had never been done before. We tried to plan it to the best that we could and try to anticipate what we could, but it's just you only can do what you can do. Especially
I would cast my vote and then go to the supermarket, go shopping, and then come back and be like, we're tallying him up and going through the count. We're up to state starting with H, Hawaii, or whatever it was. It's all good.
But it was an adventure. But that was sort of like the climax of my story. After that, I was just kind of focusing on my career. Well, it's not that I had
pieced out.
Well, I needed to like take one. I was like, I had this new career as a programmer, and I really needed to kind of like focus in developing that. So that's what I've been doing. I've still been putting out a lot of content, but it's also all coding content, coding podcasts, coding videos, still the occasional libertarian podcasts. But I do plan on getting back into the fray of things eventually. It's just like I think there's a lot of great leaders who are kind of rising up in the party who I think it's their time to shine.
Sure.
And like, I think I do look back on it, and I think the role I played was a role that I had to play. I think I was in the right place at the right time, and it was the place where I was meant to be at that time to be. When I look back on it and I look at the context and I look at like how other ways it could have played out with different people, I'm like, yeah, that had to be me in that moment. And I think that's kind of like why I was there. I don't necessarily feel that the need for me is still there at the moment.
You trust your gut, my friend. It sounds like you trust your instincts. You know when you just follow your instincts.
Yeah, I just kind of follow where it just seems like this is where I need to be at the moment. I do think I'll need to, at some point, I think it will feel like it's time to come back and that I will be needed again. Right now, I feel like I'm more needed where here in my career and with my family for the time being. And that's where my focus is. Just, basically earning the money and spending time in a more family way.
And that's a great place to have impact as well with your family and in the workplace. You're bringing all of that knowledge and experience and even your political ideas to that as well. And I think that's what we as the broader liberty movement need to do is, and I'm not the first person to talk about this, of course, and we've kind of even touched on it a little bit, is about the whole idea of us just like doing things and being ourselves and being liberty-minded people, but in other subcultures and in other worlds, and just being the people with kindness and empathy and patience and all those things. And then people will gravitate towards us and, hopefully some of our ideas too.
It's great to be those things because like when you're nice, forgiving,
that's the other one,
and all that stuff. Yeah. Like when you're all those things, like, it's a lot better than not being those things. Like you don't forgive people. You're just constantly holding this grudge. It's constantly making you angry. If you're not kind, then people are mean to you back. If you don't tolerate people, people don't tolerate you. Like you get what you put out there. So why not put out the best?
Who are we forgiving? Are we forgiving people who haven't even apologized? We got to forgive them anyway. Is that it's more forgiving other people is not about them. It's about us. Someone doesn't have to say I'm sorry for me to already jump ahead and just forgive them in my mind for their lack of whatever it is. Is that what I need to? But it's what?
it's for you to live your life. Like you don't want other people who've wronged you preventing you from living your life.
Yeah.
So by forgiving them, you're just saying, hey, you're not going to occupy my mind anymore.
I see.
But also at the same time, you prevent those. You also, but also sometimes it's not necessarily just about that. It's also about like, people like make mistakes. Like, a lot of times, like for example, you see people who get kicked out of their house because they somehow did something that their parents didn't approve of. But parents were more forgiving and say, hey, you know what? We may have a difference of opinion here, or I may not agree with what you did, or whatever. But I'm not going to cast you outside my life. Like that makes a difference in how people live their lives and the quality of life they have, and whether things turn into hate and whatnot. And hate always turns into violence. So the idea is like, how do you foster a world where love tends to be the stronger force?
Right. We need to talk about it more, but no one ever talks about it in a serious way. Like all these ideas are like sort of become cliches and things that people hang up in their living room, but not taken like seriously.
And I do think there's an appetite for that right now. Like I think the 2020 election showed that there, like regardless of like what, like Biden policy wise, like I'm not gonna, like for the most part, like, and then again, I don't to be fair, like a lot of people didn't necessarily vote for like Biden to vote for Biden. They voted against Trump or something.
Right, of course.
But I do think there was an element, like by the way Biden positioned himself, he didn't talk about policy much at all. He talked more about just a kinder, gentler America. And I do think there was an appetite for some of that. Like, I think there's part of the reason why he ended up surviving the primary. That and COVID. Like, COVID definitely helped him win the primary. Because
he's like Schumer. He's another. I mean, obviously now he's deteriorating, but he still has that sleazy politician in him, and is able to say the right things that have been working for centuries on the masses.
Yeah. Well, he's a tried and true politician, but the things I think, like far as like the marketing, the people who were like preparing like the marketing and sort of perception of his campaign, I think we're in the right vein in the sense of trying to run like the Biden campaign. I'm not saying like the left. The Biden campaign though was trying to promote like a message of sort of like unity and peace and a kinder, which I think was the right message. I don't think it mattered much, but I do think there's an appetite for that there, and I think like if you combine that with good policy, like a message of love and kindness and peace and whatnot, and you combine that with just solid economic policy, you can have something really powerful.
Yeah, we're working on it.
Yeah, one day at a time.
Yeah.
And I think we'll get there. I think we got some good messengers. I think we got some, the libertarian cause has a lot of promise these days. We just need to just get along with each other better.
Yeah, for sure. But I do sense that I feel like that since 2011, 2012, or even back to 2007, there was like some maturity. I think something happening with the broader movement. Maybe I don't know if it's us getting older, becoming dudes in our late 30s, 40s, or older, or whatever, and other people, but or is it like just the movement? But I think there's more. I don't know. There's growth. There's like what would you can like the term personal growth? How do you describe that in a group sense? A group is growing as well. Like,
oh yeah,
the broader movement is developing.
Yeah, the group. Well, I mean, I think we're all the Libertarian Party and Libertarian movement is moving in the right direction on all fronts. But there's it is what it is.
I was going to ask if there's anything else. Is there anything else that you think we should cover? I think we covered it all. We covered Mom. We covered Ron Paul. We covered some of your crazy antics and getting fired. Yeah. If not, you could definitely tell people that I could find and follow you or anything else you're working on. I'll kind of give you the floor to wrap things up.
If you head over to alexmerced.com, you can find everything. You can find my podcasts. You can find my videos. You can find merchandise. But yeah, alexmerced.com is really the place to go find. Follow me on Twitter, twitter.com/alexmerced. I'm not really on Facebook all that much these days. So bottom line, Mastodon or Twitter is probably the place to find me.
Sounds good.
And yeah, that's me these days.
Cool. Thanks again. I really appreciate the time. I'm going to be processing it. When I listen back, I'll be getting a lot of a lot of nuggets that can help me in my life, and just even just reminders and just like the way you articulate certain things and
Thank
the
you.
way that a lot of my guests do. It's like stuff I already know or knew, but it's like, hey, remember that? And then they say it in this way that sort of resonates. The way certain people phrase things, I think resonates with me. And a lot of the stuff that you said tonight, I did, and I appreciate it. And I appreciate your time, but I'll let you get on with the rest of your evening, and let's talk soon.
But thank you. Thank you very much for having me today.
You got it. Thank you, Alex. Later.
Later.
So there you have it. My conversation with Alex Merced. That was a lot of fun and helpful and inspiring. What a nice guy. I feel like I'm okay at kindness and empathy, but could always improve. And for sure have a lot more work to do in terms of having more patience and maybe even forgiveness. But life is a process, and it's all good. But anyway, for everything about this show, of course, head to peoplewelovepodcast.com. That's at People We Love Podcast. I'm at Adam Choid on Instagram and Twitter. And I think that's about all I got for today. I appreciate you guys listening. Thanks as always, and let's talk soon. Peace.